Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about hi-hat technique because for me, uh, again, when I first started out, I would cheat on the hi-hat just like a lot of people do. And what I mean by cheat is that I would just play the opposite of my bass drum. So, because typically, if you're playing a hi-hat squelch, you know, you're gonna play it on the opposite of your foot. So if you're playing, if you can see, my hands or my feet are going. Okay, now that's a safe way to play the hi-hat if you're playing basic hi-hats. And, you know, most traditional rock stuff, sure, does that. That kind of thing. Even most non-traditional stuff does that. But if you want to actually play the hi-hat, you have to learn that you should play it just like you're playing the bass drum. You shouldn't just play the opposite of what your right foot is doing and you know, counter that. Because then what happens is you're playing it up instead of down. So, in other words, when you do a squelch, you're pulling your foot off and then putting it back down instead of preparing to put it down on the beat after you play the bass drum. So I like to think of it as if I want to play a bass drum beat, I have to pull my foot away from the head to play. So it's up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. Same with the hi-hat, up, down, 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 down. So if you're gonna, you know, if you want to keep the beat with the hi-hat with eights, or sick, you know. Then you've actually got to play on the beat, 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 not off, 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 off. So it becomes more relevant if you always think like that. So prone to always doing this. Okay, so I'm always playing. You know, it's just like tapping your foot if you're a violinist. And I can play eighth notes like that, or I can play quarter notes while still tapping eighths. So it's like this. Okay, so my foot's bouncing twice as many times as I'm playing. So the transition between the quarters and the eighths is nothing. All I have to do is lift my toe up. As you can see, nothing is changing. My foot, it's just what you hear. So it's a very subtle movement, but it's still a positive movement down instead of thinking of it negatively up. And I'm not talking about, you know, bad or good, just the inverse of what a lot of people think when they're playing the hi-hat. So, and another thing is, it's not just closed or just open. There's a dozen different ways, you know. And if you look at my foot when I'm doing that, we're talking millimeters of movement. So you really have to have a fine idea of where your hi-hat's being. You know, the difference between a nice steady and almost sloshy. As you can see, my left foot is hardly moving, but just that pressure it's screwing everything up so it sounds inconsistent. And if, again, similarly, if you want a sloshy hi-hat feel, if you really do, you've got to keep that foot exactly in the same place. You know, if you really want sloshy, and you know, there's always, of course, there's all the different techniques for hitting the hi-hat, but I'm talking about foot techniques. So, you know, be aware that there's a difference between this and this. And it's all because of foot and where you're hitting the hi-hat. So it's a very it's an oft forgotten and ignored thing, but if you learn to play the hi-hat instead of passively letting it open, you'll be a much better left foot player on your bass drum too, because you're thinking down instead of up. So that's all.